Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, which is a novel about an 11-year-old detective who flies around on a jetpack, hunts giant robot bees with an EMP blast rifle with his cousin Ellicott Skullworth. It's a great time, and you can get that book, Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, as an audiobook, a paperback, and the ebook is free. Yes, free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. Once you're hooked on the series, I've got 2 sequels for you. I've also got some novels I've written for older readers under the name Robert Kent. You can get more information on all of that, not to mention hundreds, if not thousands, of interviews with middle grade authors, young adult authors, all the best authors, literary agents, editors, publicists, all the best book people. You can get all of that at middlegradeninja.com. And by golly, that's more than enough intro. My guest is Erika Lewis, who I am thrilled to talk about. In fact, we were exchanging emails earlier, and I'm going to go ahead and tease this up front. You told me, Erika, that you have endless ghost stories and that you believe E.T. was possibly a work of nonfiction, by which I assume you meant that in the 80s, adults really did just let their kids ride bikes anywhere unsupervised, no problem.
Yeah, and we found aliens all the
time. So we will tease all of that here at the front. We will absolutely get to the many ghost stories that you have for us. But first, we're going to talk books and writing and all the usual stuff we talk about on this show. So the esteemed audience knows that I never summarize anyone else's background or anyone else's book, because that is just asking for trouble on both counts. So best place to start is if you would give esteemed audience an overview of your background, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. Let's see, what can I tell you about myself? I grew up in Alexandria, Virginia, and spent a lot of time in Massachusetts in the summertime. Then went to university in Nashville, Tennessee. And then after I graduated from Vanderbilt, I got a master's degree and some other degrees after that, but ended up working in television for 15 years, I guess. For all the big studios, Sony, NBC Universal. I finished up there having a lot of fun working at a network that was called G4, which is just now relaunching, working on, I basically ran the studio there, which was really fun. And then I had been writing for many years. And so I finally got the courage to start showing some of my work. A lot of it still remained in the drawer, and I brought out other things and reworked. And eventually I was fortunate to get my first graphic novel sold, called The 49th Key. And then I had a debut novel that came out from Tor called Game of Shadows. And I've sort of been writing ever since, which has been great. And yeah, so that's kind of who I am and what I've done. So I kind of work in both the novel space and the comic space. And I recently had my debut YA came out called The Color of Dragons, which I actually co-authored with RA Salvatore, which was amazing. And now my first middle grade is getting ready to come out, and it's a series, and I'm so excited for it. There you have it.
And that is Kelcie Murphy at the Academy for the Unbreakable Arts.
Yes.
Which we're talking March 5th, wink, wink, esteemed audience.
March 1st.
Show ahead of time. But March 1st, so the book is available now, esteemed audience. By God, go get your copy.
Yes, that's the middle grade that comes out. That story is, would you like a little bit about the story?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So this is a story about a girl who's a foster kid in Boston. Kelcie has had a very tough life. She's been moved around constantly. She has this crazy caseworker who's always been, completely useless in her life, and she finds out why in the very first chapter. Because all kinds of craziness breaks loose, and he, along with his accomplices, force her to unleash a great evil upon the world. And when I say the world, I actually mean the other world, because she discovers that she's actually not from here. She's from somewhere else. So Kelcie goes on a journey after them, basically trying to find out who her parents are, because she's never known who her parents are. She was abandoned when she was too young in her mind to remember who they were. She was 5 years old. But when she gets through to this other place, she somehow ends up at this military magic school. She doesn't know what it is. All these kids are in fancy uniforms, all this craziness going on. And the story sort of keeps going from there. She ends up having to test for this school because there's no invitations given. If you can't get past the test, you can't get in. And then she finds out, unlike in a lot of the other stories that I've read over the years, this story, she ends up in literally the most hated group of kids. All of her Fianna, which is her team, are very flawed in their own ways. They're all overcoming obstacles. They're all overcoming different things. And specifically the den that she's in is from a group of people who've been very oppressed, and it's a very hard thing. But she overcomes a lot of these things, and Kelcie's a tough kid, and she powers through, and there you have it. So at the end of the day, it's about saving the other world from this great evil. It's about saving the school from the great evil. It's about saving her friends from the great evil, and they have to work together as a team and overcome a lot of these shortcomings that they feel like they have personally to be able to do that, to save everyone. So
who is the ideal reader for the story?
I don't really know. I mean, I would, the publishers call it 8 and up. I guess it depends upon your reading level. As far as whether you like fantasy, I think anyone who's a fan of Star Wars, Avatar: The Last Airbender, anyone who likes to read Percy Jackson kind of stuff. There's a lot of action, a lot of adventure. It's a little darker, a little more than those, but there's still a lot of humor in it. So I don't know, any of the kids who, like me, could rewatch Avatar: The Last Airbender 5,000 times, or Star Wars Rebels, or Clone Wars, or all those kinds of things. I think there's a lot of that kind of tone in it.
So how excited are you for that new Netflix version of Avatar?
I'm very excited. I'm always skeptical of everything live action because they're, in the sense of trying to actually have elemental powers. Do you know what I mean? That's a big, bold. So I'm curious to see how it goes. You know what I mean?
Well, I heard M. Night Shyamalan nailed it. I haven't seen the movie, but I heard
really.
No.
You're talking about the movie?
I did not hear.
I don't want to diss the movie because I feel bad. My kids liked the movie when they were little, and I tried. I feel like, the nice thing is that the special effects have finally come around to a place where they have caught up. It's just with Avatar in particular, you're talking about fire bending, and you're talking, you know what I mean? I'm curious to see how that all works out. So we'll see.
Well, without spoiling, if this were to be adapted live action, Kelcie Murphy would need a considerable special effects budget.
It probably would need a big budget for special effects.
And you've got the studio, so I imagine you could greenlight this. But if I could say this is greenlit, it's happening for sure, would you prefer that it be an animated series, or would you prefer it be live action?
I think that the book itself fits the world of animation very well. I can already see the animation playing out in my head a little easier, I guess. I don't know.
We'll circle back and talk a little bit more about your time there in Hollywood. But for now, I had some questions I wanted to make sure I asked you about the book. One, I wanted to, well, kind of a silly question, and not non-spoilery. We encounter an Officer Grimes early on who may or may not actually be a police officer. Who knows? Is that an allusion to the Walking Dead?
Allusion to the what? I missed that last one.
To the Walking Dead?
No, it actually was not. I don't know why, but that character has always been a Killer Grimes to me. And she is in book 2 as well. She's just, she's a character. And no, I actually don't have any. The only homages to anything on the names is that Cillian Murphy, the actor, I was watching Peaky Blinders and his last name is Murphy. And I was like, oh, that's probably a good name to use because it's probably a really common name. So I literally, Kelcie's name started with Cillian Murphy. So, but yeah.
Scarecrow himself.
Yep. Yep.
Well, that's fun. So now we know for sure it's one person who has to be cast somewhere. When they do the film or animated version.
There we go. He gets a part for free.
Do you have like a dream cast in the back of your mind, or do you just see the characters as themselves?
No, yeah, I don't. And maybe it's just because I have worked in the business. I don't actually see like real life actors in my head when I write the characters. Sometimes I'll use different pictures for inspiration, but they're usually not of anybody that I would be aware of, like in something. So no, I never really think about the cast. I mean, I think for me, one of the most interesting roles are Kelcie's parents, who obviously she finds out something about in the book, and who pop up potentially. And for me, I have an impression of what they would look like, and they're probably the most ones that I have seen actors in my brain a little bit for. But with the kids and with the teachers now, they're also, Skyhawk, the teacher who is the principal of the school, called the preceptor, is actually a lot of the storyline comes right out of Irish mythology. And she's an Irish mythological character who taught all the biggest heroes in Ireland how to fight with magical weapons and martial arts. And she had a school that I went to visit on the Isle of Skye, thousands and thousands of years ago. That's ruins now, called the Fortress of Shadows. It's called Dunsky Castle. And so in my mind, sometimes I have impressions of these specific like legendary characters, like people who've drawn her before because she's a fairly well-known figure. But yeah, not real life people.
I kept imagining her as Aloy from the Horizon Zero Dawn, because I'm counting down, as we record this, I'm counting down the hours to Horizon Forbidden West. That's my big media release of the year. So yeah. It's already in my mind. She could be Irish. Why not?
Well, and technically speaking, the Isle of Skye is now a part of Scotland. I don't know back then if it was all kind of like a hodgepodge, but yeah, technically almost everything in the story, except for maybe a few of the more monstrous characters that are from a couple of the Celtic European mythologies. Most of it's all straight from Irish mythology.
So you're there at the Isle of Skye, and you see these ruins. And you learn about the warrior queen. So when does this story start to take root? Do you never want to ask, where do your ideas come from? But it sounds like maybe there.
It comes from traveling. I mean, I lived in the UK for a year during school, and then was constantly going back, and we spend a lot of time there. I spent a lot of time specifically in Ireland. But I had forced my poor kids to go on one of those tour bus things, those small ones. And it was actually kind of funny because when we got on it, there was probably like, I don't know, 10 people. It's like one of those small little Mercedes things. They're not like a big bus, it's a small one. And it was on a tour of the Highlands all the way up to Skye with the intention of going to Dunskye Castle because I knew I wanted to go see it. I had just had Game of Shadows come out, and my editor was asking me about what I wanted to do next. And if I finally wanted to do middle grade, because that's where my heart is. And I was like, yeah. And she's asking me for a proposal. So I was like, okay, well, I have an idea, but I want to go see this place first. And so they kept stopping, and there were a lot of Outlander fans on the bus. And I love Outlander, don't get me wrong. I love the books, I love the show, I love the actors. I mean, I love everything about Outlander. But we kept stopping at all these, like the Castle Leal, we kept all the sites where they were shooting all over. And, you know, it's funny because when you come from LA, it's like, I don't want to go to a set. I want to go, you know what I mean? It was like, I don't need to do that right now. But my poor kids, they were like, I think 8 and I don't even know. They were so young at the time. And they were like, really? We're stopping at another ruin and another castle and another location. And it's always Outlander, Outlander, Outlander. It was really funny. But that was really fun. So when we got to the Isle of Skye, I was talking to them about the story of the school, because she wouldn't train you unless you could cross her bridge of leaping, which is a part of the story in the book, and the bridge would throw you off. And so every time my daughter would like inch towards getting on the bridge, I'm like, get off, don't cross it, don't cross it. There's a big giant hole in it right now, so I don't even know if it would hold up, but you never know. So yeah, so my inspiration for this story started with that school, the idea of a military school run by this, you know, kick butt woman who is just such a legend. And then I wanted to tell a big story. I wanted to talk a little bit about our times, and the kids were sort of fit into the world. You know, I don't know which came first, but each one of the kids in her group has something about them that makes them sort of like the perfect fit for their team together. And the Fiannas, as they call it, and Skyhawk puts them together on knowing full well sort of how each of these people are going to play together. And so for me, it was being able to draw upon some a little bit more stories that we're talking about now too, because it is a story about war. It is a story about a never-ending war, you know, between these two places in the other world, and whether they even know why they're still fighting.
So when you go there, then you've already had the conversation with your agent. You know you need to be thinking of something for a middle grade novel. So that's already your mind is fertile with that.
I was very fortunate. My editor at Tor at the time was also working with Tor Teen and Starscape, and she knew with my voice, even with Game of Shadows, it's about a 14-year-old kid. I like to write for middle grade, and she was great. She was like, yeah, we'd love, you know, I would like to be able to buy something from you again. Would you consider writing me a story set in Celtic mythology for middle grade? And that was sort of my marching orders. And I was like, oh, I got something for you. Sure. So, but then, you know, it's a process. You're still writing a long proposal, and then at least the first 4 or 5 chapters for them to review. And you can't really do, you know, you sell your first book and then you get somebody who likes your writing, and then I think it's easier to do it that way. But I have to tell you, I'm writing on constant deadlines now, and I wouldn't mind going back to the other direction where you write the whole book first and then you sell it, because it's nerve-wracking being under those time constraints. So.
Well, with the so you go out and you do the travels, but then there is a fair amount of mythology in the book. It's not a textbook; it's a story, but there's a fair amount of background that you provide for the reader. So, how much research are you doing, and how are you going about doing it?
For for most of my stories, I do a lot of research if I'm going to base it in something that's not completely fictionalized. With Irish mythology, I have spent probably a decade researching, because Game of Shadows was also set in Irish mythology, and I worked with a professor at Trinity and drove around to see everything I could and touch everything I could, so that when I was sticking stuff in the story, without spoilers, in book 2, there's stuff about the Stone of Destiny, which is a stone called Failfall that's in the Hill of Tara right outside of Dublin. And in the legend has it that when a new king or queen was going to be coronated, or they needed one, it was like a King Arthur thing. You touch the stone and the stone would cry out for whoever was the actual chosen person to rule. And it's interesting because there's a Stone of Destiny on the Hill of Tara. There's one in Edinburgh Castle. It's still the stone that the king or queen in England, in the UK, is actually coronated on. They still use it for coronations, which is crazy. So I went to go see all of that. I went to go see and touch, and because I want to, for me, it's fun, but it's also it's a really interesting part of ancient mythologies that hasn't been explored as much as like Greek mythology and Roman mythology. And I think it's fun to give everybody a really, a real look at those kinds of things for the kids, so that, it's kind of like that movie Indiana Jones. When I was little and I first saw the first Raiders of the Lost Ark, I remember the opening scene where they Harrison Ford's character, Indiana Jones, opens the Bible and he blows the dust off right everywhere. And there's this picture of the Ark of the Covenant and the Hebrews all sort of bending down that they put inside and I was like, wow, I got to go look that up when I get home and see what that is. So it was sort of like, okay, as a kid, you pick up little things and then you want to go and you want to research them more. And it just sort of opens your eyes to studying history. And so for me, I like to research a lot. And then I like to throw it all into the crazy pot and just do something strange with all of it, so.
Something that did you touch on in the book and that you've spoken about elsewhere is that the Irish mythology, the women play a very important role as well. In fact, what the Brehon laws are the foundation of their legal system that makes them a little bit more equal. How so?
Well, Brehon laws were, and I'm not an expert in those specifically, but those laws were on the books long before I would say Christianity came into Ireland. The idea was that women and men were equal in everything, in marriage. In fact, they actually had a funny, kids, it's probably won't be as much fun for kids to be interested in, but it's kind of funny. When you got married, a year later, on the day you were married, you could turn to your spouse and say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, and you're done. And that's the end of the marriage. After you get a trial period for a year. And they had all kinds of laws about separating things. And, it was just a matriarchal society in that kind of way. The children of Danu was their chief goddess, I guess you would call it, their Zeus, so to speak. Although their gods and goddesses were a little bit different than, they were less related to, lightning and that kind of thing, and more related to harvests and nature things. Excuse me, but it was very matriarchal. And it's just the way it's different.
You say that three times, like we're summoning Beetlejuice. I divorce you, and then that's the end of the marriage. That sounds.
The end of your marriage, 1 year, and maybe it's a year and a day. I think it's a year and a day after you get married. You make your decision, and if there are kids in the marriage, there's all kinds of. It's all written down on how you're supposed to divide and conquer. Yep.
Just thinking, long bad weekend that might slip out. Like, oh, you have a week to think about it. You calm down. Oh, never mind.
Yep.
Somewhere is a happy compromise between way too easy and way too difficult.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, but that sounds a little close to the too easy.
Yeah. Although they were getting married a lot younger. So.
Oh, well, sure. What age are we talking?
I don't know. I mean, I have to imagine, I did a lot of studying about this great woman who was the pirate queen there. I don't know if you know Grace OMalley. Do you know who Grace OMalley is?
I heard the name.
Okay. So Grace OMalley was in charge of her clan. But when she was, I think she was married off, I want to say when she was 15 or 16 to her first husband. But her father was a pirate and a clan leader. And when she was like, I don't know how old she was, but when she was little, she wanted to go with her dad on the ship. And her mother said, no, your hair will get caught in the sails or whatever. So she went upstairs and she cut all her hair off and she came back down. She's like, okay, I'm ready to go. And that sort of started her pirating days. And this was during, she grew up in the same time period as Queen Elizabeth. And they were both in power, so to speak, at the same time. And there was actually a famous meeting between the two of them when I think it was her son and her son-in-law were arrested by the British, which was happening a lot to the Irish then. So she sailed her armada over to Dover and blockaded the ships in. And she was a pretty incredible pirate, so to speak, but they call her the Pirate Queen, and she's a fascinating character.
Well, yeah, no, if you're going to be married off at 15, 16, I think a 3-word or three sentence divorce, that's more than
well. And I don't think she had a divorce. I think he ended up he got killed. I can't remember all of the stories. She had 3 husbands. She had 3 husbands, but look it up. She was really cool. She's a really cool character.
Yeah, that sounds like the kind of thing where you just hop on a boat and sail away, and as you're going over the coast, just yell, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, goodbye.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your partnership with RA Salvatore. So that's your debut young adult novel, yeah?
That was my debut YA, yeah.
So how do you get partnered up with a giant like that right first at bat?
Well, I was very fortunate. It goes back to my TV days. I was working at a production company called Fireworks, and we had decided we were going to option the Forgotten Realms. And for listeners who don't know what that is, it's the world where Dungeons and Dragons is played. There's been a gazillion novels written by it, and Bob is with the Dritz character, and back starting with Homeland, is just a legendary author in that world, and obviously Demon Wars, and he's got a bunch of many more books now. But back then, I was just coming up the ladder. I was a manager, and I was like, we have to get Forgotten Realms. And somehow we managed to negotiate a license for it. And so as we were developing what I wanted to do as a TV series, which it's a long story. This is the world of development in television. Is so hard. But I went to Gen Con with Hasbro and met a lot of the authors, and because I knew I wanted to work with one who to develop the show so that we we isolated a little part of the realms that hadn't been worked on yet, and it was going to be like this whole thing. And I loved Bob's writing so much. I was like, I really want to work with him. So we worked with him on that project. And then afterwards, we just kept in touch, and over the years, and with his wife Diane, we just sort of knew each other. And Bob was would read some of my early drafts of stuff and tell me whether it was terrible or not. He was very much a mentor for me. And then he was approached by Temple Hill, which is a production company out here, to write a YA novel. And he had never really worked in the younger space, even though some of the books have younger folks in them. He had never worked in that. And so he was like, well, I can I get somebody who's going to do it with me. So that's how he and I ended up partnering up on The Color of Dragons. It's a deal, a partnership with Temple Hill that they then took to HarperCollins and sold. So that's how I ended up writing that book with him.
Well, you know what? The Lord of the Rings TV show looks fine. I hope it's great. But where is my Dark Elf trilogy movie?
I know. I think Bob would say the same thing. I don't know. I'm not allowed to talk about things, and I have heard some rumors, but well, you know, it's always the rumors, and then they never happen. And so, yeah, hopefully soon, because that would be, I'm agreeing with you. It was funny because the Lord of the Rings movies had just come out, and that's why I was like, oh, we have to go make this now, back then. But yeah, it didn't. It's a long story, but we didn't end up making the show.
I think a long television series would work just fantastic for that series.
Mm-hmm. It would have been, and especially now, I actually think a lot of these novel-based series are better off in limited series or in television series, whatever we want to call them these days, streaming series. I think movies, trying to squeeze all that stuff in a 2-hour movie is really kind of hard.
It's genre just goes on forever.
Exactly.
You could have multiple. It could be the next Doctor Who. You could have all sorts of.
It could go on forever. Exactly.
How does this get started? Does he offer like, hey, are you writing something? Can I read your work? How do you get critiqued from RA Salvatore?
Oh, you mean, well, we wrote that together. We sat down. He has a home out here. He's usually back east in Massachusetts, but he also has a home out here. And so when he was out here, we sat down. They gave us a treatment that they sort of wanted us to work with a little bit, and then we sort of rewrote that and put our own stamp on it. And I would write something and he would edit it up, and vice versa. And then when it came to writing the book, we would take chunk. We were both on deadline. I was working on Kelcie Murphy, and he was working on a lot of the new Dritz novels, and it was a little bit hard because we sort of had this big window open, and then the deals took so long and everything takes so long. We finally started on it. And I mean, I would have liked to have at least another 6 months to work on that book, especially the back half of the book, because the ending comes up pretty quickly. But you know, in hindsight, what can you do? It was a publishing date. This is deadlines. This is what we were talking about with deadlines. And we had to turn it in and get it done. But we would go back and forth. So I would write some, send it to him, and then we'd go back. The chapters go back and forth between a girl named Maggie and a guy named Griffin. And, you know, I'd like to say that I wrote Maggie and he wrote Griffin, but we both kind of wrote all of it. So.
Gotcha. Yeah. So. But he's critiquing you, you're critiquing him. Yeah. Both of you are doing the rewriting.
Well, I don't usually critique him, to be perfectly honest.
Fair enough.
I mean, in the sense that I read his work and I'll be like, okay, for kids or young adults, in this case, it was 13 and up. Although this book does skew a little younger, because it's you know, the whole King Arthur feel of it makes it feel very young. But you know, his he picked up pretty quick. You know, he he's yeah, he's extremely talented, and I wasn't about most of the notes that on both ends that we were giving each other were story driven notes, as opposed to critiquing a word on a page, kind of thing, if that makes sense.
So things like, I want the story to go this way, and if you do that, it can't go this way, or this is just a little.
Like I threw in some seriously dark elements in the first draft, and he was like, "Oh wow, okay," and I was like, "Okay, we don't have to do this. We don't have to do this. We don't have to do this." And so he sort of dialed that back a little bit, and then built up the magic of the world, because you know, there's so many worlds, magical worlds now, and finding a way to do something that feels slightly original is not necessarily the easiest task. So for me, I really wanted her to feel a little bit, you know, authentically connected to the moon, and in all forms. And so, because her power comes from the moon, and you know, so we were building a lot of that stuff together, and he would do a great job of, like, you know, poking holes in that, and why is this happening and that not happening. And with Griffin as a character, he's sort of the champion on the decline, falling out of favor with the king, so to speak, and who's got evil and robbing the hinterlands of all of their food and calling it taxes in order to feed his walled city, is the premise. Yeah, you can tell I wrote it during those crazy political years. So funny. But it was it was more about Griffin and the fighting styles, and in the ring, in the arena, and then just sort of making sure that there were enough surprises along the way that people didn't guess the story as we get towards the end. He's just, you know, he's a story genius. So,
You know, if I would not be a good partner for him, because if I noticed and I saw that most of his sentences didn't have punctuation, I would just assume, you know what, we're not doing punctuation in this book. And I'm wrong. I'm sure he has his reasons.
You know, the one thing that Bob would never do is not put punctuation in if he wasn't doing it on purpose. Like he was so good about finding every typo and fixing every, you know, grammatically speaking, it was way better than I am, because I'm slightly, I have a little bit of a reading disability. So for me, a lot of times I switch words and switch letters in words when I'm typing. So I have to go back through things 5 or 6 times before I can even pass them on to somebody else without feeling like I've, you know, embarrassed myself. But he would catch things, and I'd be like, oh, you know, I'm sorry about that, you know. But he was so good about catching everything. He could have been a copy editor.
And by the way, I meant to ask, with Kelcie, it's a part of a series. Do we know any idea how many books we're going to be looking at and when we might expect to see the second?
Yeah, I'm the second one is supposed to come out. They're supposed to come out one a year. So I'm hoping it will be March of 23. You know, so far so good. I should knock on something. We'll see. But there's 3 books that they've picked up. Right now it's in my head it's 4 total books. It may be 3, it just depends. It's a pretty big arc to get from book 1 to the very end of the story in one book in the middle. So but I've written book 2. I'm editing it now, and there's most definitely at least going to be 3, and I'm hoping there'll probably be 4. Yeah.
But if book 3 is just mega sized, and
it might just be, it might be Deathly Hollow size, you know.
Then we'll know that that's how they're working that.
There you go.
Does it when you're working on your sequel, now that you've done your at least your preliminary world building, and you know the characters, is that any easier, or are there all new challenges? And if so, what?
Yeah, well, in book two, unlike in book one, we talk and we hear a lot about the lands of summer and the lands of winter, but in book two, it was massive world building because we leave the school on a mission, and we see a lot of the lands of summer. We are going to go into the lands of winter. They go back into the human world a little bit. It was a lot of world building, which is hard because you built the whole school and then you think, oh, I'm done. But no, I did this to myself. It's a big other world, and it's all leading to something, and it's really important. So in book two, where there's the Academy for the Unbreakable Arts on the lands of summer, we meet some new characters too who are from winter, who go to a rival school. So there's, the lands of summer gets into huge jeopardy, and our favorite Fiona has to go and save the day. But along the way, we literally introduce all of these characters from the other world. So we meet a lot of people. And when we start the story in book two, we start it actually with some of, you learn in the book that the clan that Kelcie come from, the Fomorian clan, there was a lot of backlash to an event that happens, which I don't want to talk too much about because I don't want too many spoilers, but the Fomorians have all been taken from their homes right about the time that Kelcie was abandoned, actually, in the human world, and moved into a place called Chalwell Woods, which is the most dangerous place in all of the lands of summer. But they've been moved there, call it like the Japanese internment camp here. I don't really want to connect it to the Holocaust, but it's a similar kind of thing where these people, they were being moved because they're paying the price for something somebody bad did in their clan. And Kelcie is a part of that clan as well. She finds out she is Fomorian. And so for her, she, a lot of book two becomes about figuring out who she is and how she's a part of that world, and going there at the beginning of it before she goes back to school. And so we get to see a lot of that. So there was a massive amount of world building and really important issues, I felt, to tackle in a fantasy world, so that it gives kids the ability to sort of read these things and think about the world around them a little bit, and these things that happen in our real world that are sort of very similar in that way, and about how she's going to go about helping the other her den mates who are in book one, make real change for her own people. So this just becomes a bigger story.
It's tricky when it comes to the Holocaust. Obviously, the Holocaust is the Holocaust. You don't want to be comparing things. Wearing a mask is not the Holocaust, or any of these other trite comparisons that come. But no. When you're writing a fantastic novel, and obviously, although we're talking about fantasy, we're talking about fun, we're also talking about humanity and trying to make sense of the human condition. And so there is, I think, a question mark in most of our heads, whether it's the Holocaust, whether it's some other genocide or ethnic cleansing, where you're going to see shades of real life events without reflecting those exactly, or without saying, hey, this is as serious as that. Obviously, it's not. But no. It makes sense that you would want to explore that you would want to what's the word? I'm struggling to find to express that, to ask those questions of why do these terrible things keep happening amongst humanity, but through a fantasy lens where we don't have to look at anything directly specific, sort of indirectly looking at this terrible thing. Is that right?
Yeah, well, fantasy's always been a good place for that. I mean, Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 is about book burning. Let's there it is. You know what I mean? It's the fantasy world of that. And so, for me in this particular, I come from a Jewish family. I would not compare what the Fomorians go through in this. It is much more like the Japanese internment camps that we had here in the US. But I feel like a lot of people are talking about the Holocaust right now. And I do think that it's a really important time to be open to having those conversations, because kids learn a lot through books and through things that they're watching in TV. And adults too, in terms of what they're, but with, in this particular situation, it's about compassion. It's about learning to have courage of conviction, which is what these kids have to have. And her whole Fiona being a part of it, especially when we discover who Niall is at the end of the book, which I'm not going to give away. There's a lot of reason why we can show kids making a real change, a real difference, and have them stand up for the bully who's doing wrong, and have them step in front of the person who's harassing someone in class, and be a part of compassion and building a world that doesn't see each other's flaws. I can't speak today. Flaws all the time. We look at each other and we see flaws instead of just meeting the person and meeting the person. You instantly come at it with a first impression, and Kelcie does that in her own group of friends that she meets when she first gets there. I mean, other than Niall, initially, like she and Brona, wow, she sees Brona a particular way, and by the time you get to, and so do we, a very classic sort of know-it-all, perfect girl, and by the time you get to the end of the story, it's her situation is very different. It's not what anybody thought it was. And same for Niall. Zephyr has the perfect family. Not perfect. They weren't happy with him going to the academy. They want him to sleep in the barn, but he has a more supportive family. But it's interesting because the first time Kelcie meets Brona, she's perfect. Everything about her. She can fight perfectly, and she's a goddess's daughter, and everybody loves her and wants to be her friend, and she's real popular. And unlike a lot of stories out there right now, at least that I can think of, Kelcie's not popular and never has been. She comes at things from a little bit of she's got trust issues. She doesn't really want to expose too much about herself to anyone. But by the end of it, she becomes a little different person. And as we get into book 2, and she's got to meet more people, it's for me a great way to talk to kids about the fact that they can change the world if they put their mind to it, if they have their courage of conviction, and they see the world, make the world a better place. And have hopeful messages, I guess is the way to say it, at a time when things are really hard right now. So.
Oh, fair enough. Wanted to ask a little bit about world building. There is a glossary in the back of Kelcie Murphy, which I love because it's a nice reference for things that aren't real but could be, but should be. Is that a glossary? Did that grow out of your notes and your world building? Or how do you go about keeping track of your world, especially for something where you're going to have at least 3, potentially 4 books?
I have a wonderful editor who helps me too. In this particular situation, I crafted the glossary with the stuff that was taken out of Mythology. And then I broke it out separately so that the stuff that I invented too, because I it's always hard to remember all the words. And when I look in the back of a lot of glossaries, they seem kind of like, I mean, they're all just, ripped out of the the real mythology, and I wanted to make it kind of fun and add in these things that I invented. So like the language of Fomorian and different things that were iconic things that would continue to be a part of the world as the books continue, like the sidrels, which are the trees that they travel in as transport trees, and the silver bow, which is actually a part of Irish mythology, that the fairies had to, they gave you a silver bow, otherwise you couldn't get into the other world. But those will continue to be a part of the story and into the lands of winter. So anything that I felt like was a iconic thing in the story that would relate. So I'm just going to keep adding to it, as we, because it's kind of fun. But yeah, I did that. They asked me for a glossary, but I wanted to do a glossary that was more than just about the Irish mythology in it. I wanted to sort of have everything in it. So eventually somebody could learn to count in Fomorian, So.
That make you a bit nervous, and maybe it doesn't, but it will after I ask this question. But does it make you a little bit nervous having now that book 1 is published and you've written book 2, but you've got 1 to 2 more books still to go? Do you worry that you've set something in stone in terms of the world, in terms of the mythology already published, and now you can't change it, and when you might have liked to have changed it come book 3 or whatever?
No, I've thought through a lot of the pieces of the puzzle. Like as a good example, one of the things that comes up in book 2, which you can kind of think about, is that, Kelcie didn't have a last name when she got to the human world. She was Kelcie. She only remembered her name was Kelcie. And so somebody else gave her a last name. Her caseworker does, which she explains. But there's a reason for that, which you'll discover in book 2 has more to do with Fomorians. And when you discover who her parents are, neither of them have last names either. So it's sort of those kinds of things have all been laid in on purpose. And anything else, I feel like I can always write my way out of if I get my, you know what I mean? I don't know if I have it all completely ironed out exactly like some other authors, but I have I wrote the outlines. I do my best to do outlines, and then halfway through I throw them out. And in fact, with book 2, I started it in one place, and half of everything I wrote in the first draft got moved to book 3, and I had to redo the whole thing. Not redo, but add the whole thing, because it was moving too fast and the story needed to slow down. And so the storyline is exactly the same. It's just the place the story begins is different. The first probably 70 pages. And as the war escalates, which it does throughout each of the books, that's something I hadn't quite anticipated the flow of when I started. How quickly are these things going to come on? Because sometimes I tend to write things at a breakneck pace. The action, just keep it moving, keep it moving, keep it moving. But there are times too when, especially in this storyline, a little bit in book 2, where especially in the beginning, we need to have action, but also world building that paces in at a comfortable level and not too fast. So
do you have a rule of thumb to know when you're hitting the right pace for that?
No, I'm sure an author would say, oh, action on every other page, or action, especially in middle grade. But for me, I do like, if I can, every chapter, because chapters in middle grade, they try to keep them really short so that they don't get, because a lot of times kids are reading a chapter at a time, and they only have so much time to read. So like 10 pages or less is typical with what we try to do, not do like a long 20-page chapter in middle grade. And so in that 10 pages, I always like to have a big revelation or an action sequence. So I try very, in every scene, otherwise, there's no massively talking scenes without it being tense on the page, I guess is the way to phrase it, because as this, in order to, even with me, I tend to be someone who likes to get dragged into a story and just wrench all the way till I get to the end, so it's probably why I write the same way. So that's pretty much it. There's not a whole lot of scenes where we're, sitting around in Chalwell Woods and she's, cooking with her grandmother. So she's more or less being attacked by vampires, but whatever.
I was gonna say, if there was that scene, I'd be waiting for the fairies to show up. Oh no.
Yeah, there's a lot of darkness, and it's interesting because in Irish mythology there's also they had they believe, well, I don't know if this is all true, but this is what the Irish would say. They had the first vampire in their mythology, a guy who they believed was a vampire, and they had headless horsemen. They had a lot of really interesting characters that are so much fun to play with, especially in the kids' crazy world of things. But yeah, I don't think I'd want to have to live in Chalwell Woods. That's all I have to say.
Well, having worked in so many mediums, I'm curious, how does your process differ when you're working on a middle grade novel versus a young adult novel that's a collaboration versus a graphic novel versus writing for television?
Yeah, for me, when it comes to the comic side of things, it's still a collaboration because I wouldn't have a book without an artist. I'm not an artist. And those things have to be done. You have to have a good working relationship, but more so than that, almost like think alike a little bit when it comes to when you're writing a comic or graphic novel and connecting with an artist on because they're going to bring your world to life. And so it's still very collaborative. And I've done a lot of that. So working and writing with other people, I wrote Firebrand for Legendary with Jessica Chobot. And so like I've worked with other people on the writing side as well on both those. But when you're writing a comic or a graphic novel, it's very, especially when you're working with an artist, you write a chapter, for example, and then you don't get to go back and revise. The artist is drawing and the artist is drawing. And then it's like television. It's very similar because you write a script and they shoot those pages. You don't get to go back and change those pages, right? It's in the can, as they used to say in the olden days. It's been shot, so you can't go back and change it. And with novels, the process, I think a lot of authors would say they'd tweak forever. I mean, I would tweak forever if I could. It's just, you always go back through something and be like, oh, I could have done that better. So it's a little bit of a different process. I try to be very outline heavy the way I am with my comic side of things and scripts for sure. But it's really important to also allow yourself to have the creative freedom to go back and say, okay, those first 70 pages weren't the right place to start the story. I'm going to do it a little differently and be able to change all that without being like, oh, I already sent those pages. So there's a little more freedom in prose in that way. And a lot more freedom when you're writing on your own. But yeah, so every process is different. Every process is different. I'm working on a graphic novel now that hasn't been announced. It's also in the middle grade space. And I'm so excited about it. And we're just starting the process. The artist is amazing. But it's more of, it's a production of the book. You got to keep the train going because we're all on board now, and it's got to get to its deadline. So
Gotcha. So you tweak forever, but sooner or later a deadline comes up, and I guess I'm done tweaking.
yeah, I guess I'm done. Exactly. Yeah. It's terrible. Wake up in the middle of the night. It's like, oh wait, I gotta go fix that. Yeah.
Well, esteemed audience has waited patiently, and I made a promise, and I try
Oh,
never to break a promise to esteemed audience. So we've
okay.
reached the point where let's hear some of these many ghost stories, these experiences you've had.
Forgive me, my dog is barking. Many ghost stories. So I grew up near Fort Ward, which is a Civil War spot, stomping grounds for the Union Army in Northern Virginia, and it was a very haunted place. There were graveyards everywhere for people who, just all over Fort Ward, Episcopal, the grounds there, they're all sort of connected. There's a big seminary there. And I used to wander through all the time. But the weirdest part for me was at our house. My mother put this addition on like there was a garage over top of the garage, but she never finished it. So it was always kind of creepy anyway. But she would stick all the Christmas presents in that space, and she didn't wrap them. She used to make me wrap them, which is another whole trauma as a child, because then I knew what everybody was getting. I knew what I was getting. I was forced to wrap all the presents, but I'd have to go into this little, it wasn't even a closet space. It was like attic space above the garage. So I'd go in there, and without a doubt, every time I turned the light on and the light would turn off. I thought it was a bad switch. I turned the light on and then it would start flickering on and off, not just turn off. And it was always 10 degrees colder. And so this kept happening every time I'd have to go in there. And it started when I was like, 8 years old. And by the time I was, 12, I literally started seeing outlines of figures of Civil War soldiers still in their uniforms, like passing through the door. And I guess it's got to be my imagination. This can't be real. 100% it can't be real. But as I got older, I'd have these same weird experiences. Like when I moved into the house that I live in now, there was an old 1970s doorbell, those long bars that would bong, when somebody would ring the doorbell, because the house hadn't been updated at all. And I was in my 20s, and I had a little dog. She was part chow, part just like a mutt. And she would start barking at things at different places. And when I'd walk into that area, it would get frigidly cold. And I never heard the person, except for the fact that in the middle of the night, the doorbells would start bonging together, and I would get up and I'd go out there, and I was like, could you please just let me sleep? It was the weirdest thing. And this went on and on and on for years. And what I come to find out was that the day that we closed on the house, the woman who owned the house died. And I think she came back to the house. And so I was like, okay, what do I do? She's here. So I, burned some sage, started talking to her, and I had a nice conversation with her, asking her, I was like, dude, it's like, please, I need to get some sleep. You're waking me up with the doorbell. And for a while it stopped, but then we had kids, and my son, when he was 3 years old, I think it was around 2 or 3, the first time he woke up in the middle of the night, and I was walking by his door, and I figured he was, need to go to the bathroom, or I need to come in and change him. I think he was 2. And I look in the door, and he's literally full on having a conversation with somebody. And I'm like, Jack, who are you talking to? He's like, to the lady. And I was like, Jack, you need to go back to sleep. He's like, well, she keeps talking to me. I can't go back to sleep. I was like, oh no, she's still here. So these are just some of my ghost stories that I have had over the years. So I am a firm believer in ghosts. I don't know if she's still here. I'm sorry if you are still here, but she's welcome to stay. Just don't ring those doorbells anymore. But yeah, so
Well,
those
the
are some of
phones
my
are quiet. The lights aren't flickering. She must be relatively at least calm about this particular moment.
Yeah, or our kids are just, teenagers now, and she doesn't have to deal with them.
That's how you get rid of ghosts. Get teenagers in your house.
Teenagers in the house. Exactly. Yeah.
I'm assuming that you're saving some other juicy ghost stories for your next book, and we'll all be reading about them.
Yeah, there you go.
Having had those paranormal experiences, does that calm you down about the question of life after death, or worrying about what might happen beyond this world?
Ooh, interesting question. I think I've always been a very spiritual person, just in general. I think for me personally, I think the greatest comfort I had, okay, I'll tell one more ghost story. The greatest comfort I had about something like this was that my grandmother was very ill when I moved out here. And we were really close. We were super close. And she was really sick, like to the point where I hadn't talked to her in like a month. And I'd call and check up on her, but they were like, yeah, we don't know how much longer she's going to have, but we'll let you know, kind of thing. And you can, I went back and it did the sort of goodbye thing, but she had cancer really bad. So I came back and it was like, I don't know what time it was in the morning, somewhere between probably 5 and 6 in the morning. And I was, that sort of place between sleep and awake, where you don't really know if you're awake, but you kind of feel awake, but then you're not. My grandmother came and said, I'm leaving now. And I was like, where are you going? And she's like, well, I'm leaving. She's like, I'm very proud of you. And she said some really nice things. She was like, but I have to go now. And then I said to her, I said, is grandpa here? Because my grandfather died when I was really young. I was probably like 8 years old. And then at this point I was, in my late 20s. I said, is grandpa here? And she's like, yeah, he's the one right there. Can you see him? The one with the sexy legs. And I was like, oh my God, what are you talking about? This whole, like, I never heard my grandmother talk like that. I was like, okay, so then, I think it's a dream. It's all, but it felt so real. And I went to the office, went to work, and I'm sitting there, and I'm there for maybe 10 minutes when my mother calls, and she's like, I just wanted to let you know that your grandmother passed away this morning. And I was like, because there's a 3-hour time zone difference. And I was like, what time exactly? And really, that's so weird. And then I was home at the funeral, and I said to my Aunt Diana, I was telling her this story, and she's like, and I said, and then she said the weirdest thing. She's like, Grandpa was there, and she says like, she's standing right there, the one with the sexy legs. And I was like, so weird. She's like, that's what she used to always say about Daddy. My aunt's like going, she used to always say it. And so I was like, okay, well, there you go. I guess he was waiting for her when she got there. Beautiful story. But for me, I've never questioned the idea of something beyond. I think, although I'm not necessarily an extremely religious person in any way, shape, or form, I like sort of experiencing all of it. But I definitely feel like, that there's definitely, there's a thereafter, for me. For all of us.
We'll find out soon enough on a long enough timeline.
Oh, not that. I don't want to know too soon.
Many novels from now.
I'm not done. I got stories to tell.
I've got at least 3 more Bannekers before I'm ready to go.
Yeah, see? Exactly.
And then you had said that E.T. is practically a documentary. So have you also had experiences with aliens and or
aliens? I haven't had experiences, but I firmly believe that we have been visited. I mean, all right, setting aside the footage alone that the Navy released recently, I think it was the Navy, of all the weird sightings that their pilots have had over the years. I definitely think that I was a huge fan of Carl Sagan and the book Contact and the movie Contact, and the idea that there's so many billions and billions of planets out there, and for it not to have other creatures on it, populations, worlds, it would be a really big waste of space. It would be surprising. I am a little worried that they would not necessarily come in peace, but you never know. I feel like, anybody could be visiting our world. Yeah, let's hope it's just not Independence Day. But yeah, I firmly believe in that. I honestly don't know that it's a question more than just in a lot of people's minds these days, especially after the footage was finally released. But I also feel like that it would be surprising to me that there wouldn't have been visitors at some point. And if they can all look like ET, that would be awesome.
Or at least be as nice as he was.
Yes. And make plants grow. Definitely.
Fair enough. I think, I don't know if it's maybe the Independence Day type aliens are coming. I think it's probably a little bit more National Geographic. Maybe not quite that benign. For all I know, they've had a guiding hand in our evolution. Don't know anything, just things that maybe make a little bit of sense to me based on what folks have said.
Yeah.
But I think they're definitely, at the very least, there are drones every so often flying through the airspace. They may not be piloted, but they're checking us out.
There's
And
something
it might not be interesting enough to warrant an actual trip down here. Like, oh yeah, look, those humans are, if they don't blow themselves up, a few thousand years from now, that might be a place worth visiting.
Yeah. It's interesting because when I was doing a lot of the research, people talk a lot about the Egyptian pyramids and the possibility of aliens having a hand in building something like that, architecturally speaking. And in Ireland, Newgrange, the I don't know if you've ever seen that, the solstice dome that it's made entirely of quartz. It's their big mound, and it predates the Egyptian pyramids, and it is completely it's got burial chambers, but it also lines up with the winter solstice. I believe it's the winter solstice every year. And one of the things that I found amazing is that if you go into a lot of the smaller cairns, the smaller mounds that they have all around those areas that were built like 10,000 years ago, on the ceiling, and I have pictures of it, are, yes, there's a lot of these, the bottoms of a ship, like with oars sticking out that have been carved. But there's also these weird spirals that almost look like our spiral galaxy. And they're all over, and there's stars. And, one of the professors I was talking to said, some people actually believe that the Tuatha and the gods and goddesses that came down to Ireland actually came down from the stars, came down from another planet. And it's kind of weird when you see these things in there. You're like, huh, I could totally see that. Yeah, so you never know.
The aliens come down here in their intergalactic RV, and then it's all fun. The humans are worshiping us again. It's time to move on to the next planet.
Yeah, if we could find one. I'm not sure I'm ready for Mars. I want to be able to go outside.
Well, theoretically, by the time we're able to live on Mars, we'll have worked out a way to go outside, I imagine.
How?
Just in case, let's take better care of this planet.
Yes.
Just in case we can't get
off. Very important to take good care of this planet, please. Yeah.
Erika Lewis, this has been an absolute privilege and a pleasure. I have so enjoyed our conversation tonight. My last question is always some variation of if you could go back to the start of your career, middle of your career, wherever it would have been useful to you, if you could go back and give yourself some advice that might have made a difference for you and might make a difference for everybody watching or listening to us right now, what would you go back and tell yourself?
To live in the moment, to not be in such a hurry to get to the next part. And it's really hard to do that when you're young, because, you know, when you're in elementary school, you can't wait to get to middle school. When you're in middle school, you can't wait to get to high school. When you're in high school, you can't wait to get to college. And I feel like, especially even in the early part of my job time, when I got out of college, I was always looking for my next opportunity a lot and how I was going to move up, instead of, I mean, I worked really hard on everything I was working on, but sometimes, you know, you can stop and enjoy where you are. And it goes the same way with writing. Don't be in a hurry to get your first novel to the agents. Make sure it's ready. Make sure you think it's ready. Make sure it's done. Make sure it's, you know, a lot of times, you know, you see other people's successes and you're like, why am I not there? Why am I not, you know, getting there as fast? And the truth of the matter is that you can take your time a little bit. You don't have to be in a rush, which is never something my younger self would probably want to hear, but it's okay to stay put and learn and understand and you know, really get to a place where you feel like you're ready for whatever's coming next, and then move on, as opposed to being in a hurry. And maybe that's just our Gen X generation. We were always in a hurry, but I feel like it's the same thing now with all the influencers, you know, that's all great, but you know, it's no reflection on you if you're not there yet, or you're not doing that particular thing. You know, be you. Live in the moment. That would be my advice to myself.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. Where can esteemed audience find you online, follow you on social media, and all that good stuff?
Well, my website's just erikalewis.com, and everything is on there. But on Twitter, it's Erika Ely Lewis. It's got my middle name in it, Ely Lewis, and also on Instagram. And you can find me on Facebook, and I can't remember I think it's the Erika Lewis. And then I do have a TikTok, also Erika Ely Lewis, same place to find me. I don't update it as much as I should. I try, but by the end of the day, I don't know if I'm always camera ready. You don't have to be camera ready on Twitter, so sometimes it's easier to find me there. So,
well, as always, esteemed audience, for interviews with all the best literary agents, authors, editors, all the world's best people, head to littlegreatninja.com, download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, and God willing, I'm alive. I'll see you next week.